I'd never start a gym from scratch again. I like to go fast, and it's the fastest way to do it is through acquisition. Much better to buy a good business than it is to buy a distressed business. You get profits on day one.
This week we're joined by Kev Foley, owner of the BFit Group.
We can provide a solid foundation where you can learn the business skills that are necessary to actually understand, and that's why everyone needs a mentor.
And in this episode we're diving into all things business acquisition.
Fundamentally, you're buying your time back so you can have more freedom there. Understanding what are the most important things I need to focus on. I know a lot of people, they just, they do business aimlessly without any end goal.
If you want to buy a gym or sell your gym, this is the episode for you.
You've got to get your businesses aligned and sorted and as profitable as they can be before we get any further ones. We learn how to buy gyms, businesses, how to negotiate, and all the fundamentals around that. But the first gym, I think.
We hope you enjoyed the episode. Kev, welcome to the FMA podcast. How are you doing?
Great, thanks for having me here today.
Amazing. Now, you are one of the OG FMA clients from back in the day, so it's great to finally have you down in the podcast studio. And I'm really looking forward to this episode because we're not just going to talk about how you've built your gym business, how you're not operational in the business, how you're achieving a very high level of profit margins, but we're also going to talk about how you now acquire gym businesses rather than creating a brand new gym from scratch and run through that playbook. But also, we're going to talk about what a buyable gym looks like as well. So there's so many quite unique angles from this episode. So I'm really looking forward to diving in with everything. But before we dive into that, Kev, if you could give us a bit of a run through the business, the models, and also how you got into the industry, that would be amazing.
Great, yeah, no worries. So the business is the BFit Group. We've got locations in Cardiff and Bristol. We're a semi-private training model with we do like hybrid group fitness as well. That's kind of the business as it is.
And so you started BFit, and that was in Cardiff, and then you acquired a location in Bristol, and you've also acquired another location in Cardiff, but we'll go into that a little bit later. And then you're in preparations for acquiring another business later on in the year as well. Is that correct? Amazing. So I want to kind of go through the journey. So we're going to start from location number one to building that to being not operational, and then also to how you then acquired those gyms and dive into everything there. So before we do, you mentioned it's small group personal training. What's the overall kind of price points of the businesses?
So yeah, typically average yield is around Bristol's around 172 and Cardiff's around 152.
Nice. And obviously they're not super far away, but they are different locations. Do you pick the pricing based on the location you're in, or is it just to model it around of what you want to achieve? Or
yeah, pretty much. Like Bristol's generally a bit more affluent than Cardiff is, and the prices and the wages and everything associated with that really. So that's the only difference there.
And what's the revenue of both of those gyms combined currently?
Combined, we sit around 42k.
Nice.
With that revenue.
And if you don't mind me sharing our profit margins.
Yeah, well, we always aim for 33% OCMP, and that's I think last month we were 35%.
So a little bit higher than 33%. So yeah. So
generally it'll typically range between 30 and 38, depending on kind of the front end sales and things.
Nice. And something I forgot to mention as well is that you are also a mentor for the Fitness Business Development Academy. So were you taught by them initially and then mentored? Is that how that worked?
So I've known Nikki for a number of years. I reached out to Nikki a few years back, and just I needed some accountability with the business and coaching. I felt like I was a bit static, so reached out to Nikki, and he helped guide me. He told me a few home truths and said, "Hey, you got to get your businesses aligned and sorted, and as profitable as they can be before getting any further ones," which is what we've done. And then I took coaching about a year ago now. So
nice.
I've been coaching about a year with FBDA, and it's great. I love the mentorship side of things. Like when you get into coaching for helping people and things. But I've kind of passed that with the fitness side of things. Whereas now I love business and I love coaching business. So it was a natural next progression for me. Yeah. Yeah,
and again, you've got a very wide knowledge, especially within the acquisition space, which I think in the gym owner space, not a lot of people have. So again, this is why this episode is going to be so great. But again, before we dive into that, let's focus on kind of gym number one, because before you acquired any new gyms, you had to get this first gym operational without you at all. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, I literally go to my Cardiff gym on a Monday for a team meeting just to catch up with the team. And then in the Bristol, I generally go there maybe once every 3 to 4 weeks, just again to check in with the team.
And I'd love to run through the steps of what you did to get to that place, because there obviously was a time where you were probably doing all of the sessions, right?
Yeah.
You know, and then there's probably a time where you were doing less sessions, and then there's a time where you're doing no sessions. Now, before we run through this, there's some people that like coaching, right? So it's not about you have to get off the gym floor, because if you really love that, but for you personally, your preference was to move away from that, because as you said, you loved coaching people for fitness, but that you've kind of elevated and you now want to coach people for business. But so for you wanted to get off the gym floor. Now, some people may not want to 100% do that, but at the same time, it's important to not be 100% operational in the business, right?
Yeah, I think it's great for people who want to be able to coach because they love it. You know, you want to make that part of your business. However, if you don't want to be operational and be as a coach in your business, you need to have the people in the right seats to be able to fulfill that for you. And that's fundamentally, like, you've got to build your business by a way of design. You know, you design it for your lifestyle, not somebody else's lifestyle. That's where everybody's business should be associated to what your individual goals are.
So step one is actually figure out what the end goal is for the gym, right? In terms of like, what lifestyle do you want to have and how can the business serve that lifestyle, whatever it is, which it could be, I want to get off the gym floor 100% so I can focus on expansion. I want to be able to still do some coaching, but also have a bit more free time. So would you say that's step one, like figure out what it is you want from the business?
I think my kind of catalyst was I got to the stage where I was coaching split shifts as you do. I was doing 60-hour weeks coaching, and I loved it to a certain degree. But then I thought to myself, I don't want to be that 50-year-old trainer still training clients. When I'm approaching my retirement, I wanted a family and things like that as well. So the natural next step was, if I'm going to have a family, I want to be able to do the drop-offs, the pickups, and things like that. So I set my business up to make sure I can still be able to do them.
And so for you, that was a big motivational factor, the family lifestyle, as you said, being able to pick up the kids from school, be there, be more present, rather than just like working in the business 60 hours a week. Yeah,
exactly. And my kind of weekly routine now is I work like 9 till 3 pretty much now.
Yeah.
I do drop-offs pretty much every day. I can't say I enjoy doing it every day now, but it's great to be able to do that and be there for the kids.
Yeah, and people will become a business owner and get a gym because they're one-to-one PT, and it's like, well, how do I build a business? But if you go from PT to own the gym and you're still kind of trapped within the coaching, 60 hours a week, you're still kind of in that same position as a one-to-one, right? Where you're just trading time for money, technically speaking, because the amount of clients you serve is going to be in correlation with how much the business can take in. But also you mentioned that long-term situation, like when I'm older, do I want to be in this position where I am doing all of these hours? So you kind of future pace where you want it to be long-term. Is that correct?
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
You got to take some time to sit down and draft it all out. But I know a lot of people, they just, they do business aimlessly without any end goal.
Yeah.
One thing I would say on the front of, when you're doing all the hours and things, knowing who your first hire is probably the most important thing to take in your next step as a super busy one-to-one coach.
And so go back in time, you're there super busy, 60 hours, you've got the facility and the space. Who would your first hire be? So
I'm going to probably give an answer most people wouldn't give now. Most people say you hire your first coach. For me, I think you need to hire somebody to answer your phone. Personally, if the phone's ringing and you're not answering, they're going to ring the next person up.
Yeah.
So for me, my first hire was always an admin, salesperson.
Yeah.
And I wanted them to respond to all the emails, deal with the membership queries. If people wanted to cancel, they could deal with that. You don't want to be dealing with that when you've got personal relationships with people.
So your first hire is 1 admin, but 2 actually sales inquiries.
Yeah. So basically, we have a client care role in our businesses where they fulfill the sales. So they contact all new leads that come in, but they also deal with all the daily communications with our staff and clients as well.
Yeah, that's actually the role that I did when I worked for Maxine at Potential Personal Training, because basically I pre-qualified leads and I got them booked in. And then when those guys signed up, I went through the SOP and got them in the CRM, got them into, it was Zen Planner at the time, got them, it made sure they had everything they needed. And then I would also answer the phone and someone would go, I want to cancel this session. And this was before there was really any trendy booking apps back then, really, on the smartphone. But, you know, I'd answer the phone, do all of that. So that I was one of those people basically back in the day, I think over 10 years ago. But so that would be your first hire, to kind of remove a lot of the low, like sales is a high value task, but were you still doing sales, and was that person just there to catch the inquiries when you couldn't?
Yeah, so maybe let's go back a bit then. In terms of, like, at the time I was in a leisure centre, like a gym. I was renting there, doing PT. I was working 60 hours a week. I wanted my own space naturally, but I had no time to go and look for it. I had no time to actually do any planning around it because I was just coaching so much. But at the same time, I did understand that in order to get in another space, I do need people around me to help.
Yeah.
So that's when we hired the client care person originally, and that allowed me then to get a second hire, which was a coach. I got an apprentice coaching, and from there it was a case of building him up and giving him the, I guess what's the word? Giving him the support and the room for him to nurture into a great coach. And that would allow me then to free up my time so I could then do other things. So it was kind of like a three-pronged approach, really.
Yeah, so get someone to do the admin tasks, get someone to reply to inquiries, reply to emails. But were you still, like, although that person was there supporting you in that sales, were you still selling and signing people up simultaneously?
At the start, yes. However, obviously, what I would do, their goal would just be to book consults with me.
Yes, that's it.
Yeah, so rather than me doing the phone stuff, they would do the phone stuff, and they would be like a setter. Yeah,
but yeah. So like kind of like business development, getting consultations booked and sales opportunities for you to actually conduct the consultation to sell them in, and that's how that works. And I actually think you make such a good point. And we had a previous podcast with a guy called Jack Thomas. He has this thing called the Fit Guide where they rate all these different gyms, and so one of the stats was the percentage of businesses that were able to answer the phone within a certain time period and actually and get back to inquiries, and it was shockingly low. But if you're, in that position where you're doing all the sessions and you don't have that support, it's no wonder you're not able to get back to those inquiries, right? Because you're literally doing 60 hours a week. So when that email comes in or when that phone call comes in, like you don't physically have the time. So getting that person in is going to help you actually grow and support the growth of the business, right?
Exactly. And do you know when you ring a plumber, what happens if they don't get back to you?
Yeah,
you ring someone else, don't you?
Yeah, 100%.
It's the same with fitness.
Yeah,
if somebody has a need and an urge to get started, they want a phone call and they want to have a conversation there and then.
Yeah, well, yeah. Go back to that plumber analogy. If you inquire of a plumber, you want a response in 1 minute. Really, in an ideal world, that's when you want it, right? And it's the same thing when you inquire of any other business. So having that person in place, and also just to remove those boring tasks, right? So step one was the admin person. Step two is an apprentice coach. Did that apprentice coach, did they just shadow you? Is that how you train them? Because obviously you're doing the session still. So did they
originally, basically, they shadow just to learn how we do things. This is how we coach. This is how you obviously screen. And he shadowed me. He was probably with me for about, I think, maybe 6 years, that apprentice coach. He really developed into a great coach in the end.
Was that your first hire as well?
First coach as a coach hire.
Yeah. And
he came with me to the new studio. So obviously when we got to a point where he was capable to train independently, and at that point, from a PT perspective, I would just say, hey, I'm coming in a little bit later today. You just fulfill the sessions. And then that just allowed, the clients to get comfortable with him.
Yeah, you were doing this many, he was doing this many sessions. And then it slowly transitioned to where he was doing more and you were doing less over time, basically, to kind of drip feed them in.
So I think an important topic to look at there as well is looking at your earnings as well. So when you're working 60 hours a week as a PT, you're earning well, but then, when you're hiring staff, then you need to buy your time back. So that what you generally find is you'll take a bit of a cut with your wage, but then obviously you need to bring that over time because fundamentally you're buying your time back so you can have more freedom then.
And a lot of people face this where they I need to get a staff member, but I don't have the revenue to get a staff member. And there's this phase, right, where, as you said, you're making less, but you need to buy your time back. But some people seem to get a little bit blocked by the fact that they're going to earn less. Have you seen that when coaching gym owners? And
to a certain degree, I think that that's probably something I did in the past. I wouldn't do it that way now. And obviously, when we coach FBDA clients, we recommend that they get what they want out of the business first before hiring certain roles.
Yeah.
So as long as your owner comp is where you want it to be, and you've got profits on top of that, that's a really comfortable place to start hiring with then, yeah.
Nice. So basically now, if you were to maybe go back in time and be wearing your FBDA hat back then, you go, right, I want to be making this much and this much profit, and you kind of forecast and strategically plan out that next staff hire.
Exactly the case, yeah.
Nice. And you mentioned that this first coach stayed with you for 6 years, which is, I was going to say, you're either very lucky or you've done something very good, because a lot of people, when they have their first hire, right, there's a bunch of mistakes made. The person may leave, and it's probably the most personal it's ever, like in terms of the business owner, that one might sting the most because it's the first person they've hired, and you're like, what have I done wrong? And you can get very disheartened. And there's someone in my mind right now that had that situation where they had a hire and that person left, and they were really beating themselves up basically. But you know, whenever you hire the first person, for most people, it doesn't usually. Yeah, they don't usually stay for 6 years.
You're right. Yeah, you're right there. And I think in terms of with this particular staff member, his name is Ellis. I invested a lot of time into him to develop him. Like, in fairness, he came to me with an ask. Hey, I'd love to get into the fitness industry. I'd like to learn from you. So that was great. I thought it was really good. It was proactive from him. I had a nice career pathway up to a certain point, which he benefited from. And then I think the reason he left was fundamentally he wanted to move to Canada, which was great. But from my perspective, I did learn from it as well, is to make sure that there's always something else for them to step into. Because typically, like in the fitness industry, I've got a thing where at 3 years, I say they get the itch. The staff members tend to get the itch. They want to either do their own thing or they want to move onto new avenues. Yeah. So it's about how can you create a game where actually they're constantly progressing and they've got something else to move on to and a new skill set to work on. So you want to lay the pathway out of where they can go if they continue to be part of the team and continue to help the team get to where the business is going as well. Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. And with the staffing in terms of like when they first come on board, so you said like they shadowed you. Has your process for hiring staff changed now to what it was? And what is it you do now differently to hopefully improve the process you have? So the first side was great. We've had multiple hires which weren't so great, which that's probably a story for another pod. Yeah. So I've learned a lot of lessons in the hiring process. So typically when we do our hires now, we do like obviously generally do a pre-qual call. After the pre-qual, they come into the business. I actually get them to meet the team when they're for the first interview. No, for the second interview. Yeah. So first is a phone call. Yeah. So sorry, when they come in person, they will meet the team. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So basically, we do a bit of a practical, and we have the team on board simply because if they've got to work with them, I want to make sure that they're going to be congruent together. You know. Yeah. The last thing you want is a toxic environment. And so will those coaches have say on that person? So not necessarily say, but we'll just ask for you, how did you find it? Yeah. You know, what did you like? What didn't you like? And then the managers will make a decision. Yes. So the coaches won't have a deciding factor, but they might have some influence if they went, that person wasn't very good or this person was that. Yeah. 9 times out of 10, everybody's on the same sheet. You know, they're all like, somebody leaves. No, somebody leaves. Oh, great. Yeah. You know, so it's one of those things, really. I think everybody understands who needs to be in the right seat, really. And so you got the staff member, you got the admin person, and then you were in a position to grow the business? Yeah, so from that perspective, I had time then, because I wasn't doing all the coaching hours. I had time to look at units and look around and find different spaces and studios and figure out how I'm going to fund it and figure out how I'm going to actually get all the kit and what I want it to look like. Yeah. And from that perspective, once I found a unit, it was a case of just going for it, really. And yeah, so you built the business up, you had that, and then you moved into the unit because you had the clients being served, money coming in, and you're able to spend that time to move into that unit. Exactly, yeah. And the team that, you know, we had a lean team in place, and then we hired somebody else then to come in on board then. And then in terms of growing the numbers, I kind of want to touch on kind of marketing and sales a little bit. What did you do to market and grow the membership and get it up to where it needed to be? Well, we were working with FMA at the time, so obviously we just did our standard marketing campaigns, but we generally do similar stuff now. We do leafleting, we do Facebook ads, we do Google ads. We just kind of have a whole kind
kind of like lots of different rods in the water, right, to go to the market and get people in. And something you said that was really interesting, and I think this is actually for one of the other gyms, but I'll bring it in now, is that you mentioned about, like your goal as a business owner is to keep retention lower, to increase lifetime value, and to keep members for as long as possible. And there was something you did recently that I think was quite interesting, because in this other site, you I think the churn rate, was it about 4%? Was it?
It was averaging around 4%. Yeah.
Yeah. And so what was it that and you wanted to get it down, and you were looking at the numbers, and what was the conclusion that you kind of came to there? Yeah.
So the average spend for that for the Bristol site was around £220, £230 a month. So it was just semi-private. They were offering minimum 2 times a week, but there was nothing else. So I could see that there was a gap. People were getting to 12, 18 months and then they were leaving. So what we did is we brought in like a hybrid model where they could train once a week for semi-private and have access to a new program which we put in, which is group fitness, where they can do 3 sessions a week. So from that perspective, they could train with us more, but at a lower cost, okay, of say 165. And what that did, that actually really helped with retention. And obviously initially we did, we put this out to people when they were going to leave, but then we did actually send it out to the whole member base and said, hey, if you wanted to train more often, you can add this product to your service. So for some people that bumped up the average spend, but for other people, they were at that stage where they probably need to cut back on their expenditure. So it made it a bit more cost effective on that as well.
And so the reason I wanted to bring this up, and I found it very interesting, is that the general advice that you'll get from pretty much every kind of guru out there, whatever, is raise your rates, increase your prices, go higher, go higher, go higher, which of course you should do. And I think every year you should look to do some sort of a price increase to make sure it's in line with everything else. But actually you looked at the data, you looked at the lifetime value, and you're like, how do we increase this and decrease attrition? And it was actually by placing a lower offer for people to maintain for longer. And does that increase the lifetime value of each customer?
100%. Yeah. I think the most important thing to think about that is when you look at the customer journey, generally when you deal with a new customer, they need all the help at the start, don't they? They need all that help at the start. They need to be trained 2-3 times a week with a coach so they can learn the fundamentals. But when they get to a certain point, they probably don't need as much support and accountability as they did when they first started. So it makes sense to have a product which allows you to be able to then retain them for longer.
Yeah.
But at the same time, they still need to get those touch points, maybe in part of a group setting.
But also, you didn't just pluck this number out of thin air, right? You didn't go, we're going to chuck in a product that's 160 and then let it go and see how that works. Was there a plan and process in place to map that out to see how that would work?
Yeah, so to be honest, in the Cardiff gym, we already had it set up, and the retention level spoke for itself. I think the churn rate in Cardiff is between 1.7 and 2%. Whereas Bristol was 4%, and I looked at both and said, well, what's different? And the difference was we had that hybrid model in Cardiff, and we didn't have it in.
So you basically just looked at one successful model and was like, right, let's replicate this process because we know it works. We've got the data from here. The data tells us that people stay longer and the retention is better. So let's replicate this and see how this goes.
Exactly. So the goal is to keep a client for life, yeah? When you're paying £250 a month, it's a luxury for most. So if you can give something which is still going to give them value, make them part of the community, but make it more cost effective going forwards, it's still not cheap, but it just makes it more cost effective for them to do it as a long-term solution.
Yeah. And again, it's just super interesting where it's actually by having a tactically a lower offering for members that have already been with you and paid a more premium price, you'll be able to keep them for longer and just extend the lifetime value of that customer. So just to circle back, so with BFit, the Cardiff location, you moved in, you had your client care person in place, you had a coach in place, you hired another coach?
Yeah, so we had another coach, and then eventually obviously we're now at a point where the typical kind of org chart for our companies are we have client care, deals with all the comms and the sales, manager runs the day-to-day, we have an assessor-based role which does all the check-ins and things like that, and then we have 2 coaches.
Nice. And so is the manager also a coach, or is that just the manager of the gym?
The manager, we do like the manager to coach still, only because they need to be the kind of face of the gym when obviously I'm not there. And they typically, what will happen is ideal scenarios, they'll maybe coach 2 days a week. Or if there's staff shortages, they may coach 3 days a week. That's kind of the sweet spot.
And then, so in terms of your roles in the business and what you're looking at to make sure things are moving along right, there's a meeting on a Monday, you said, that you go into. And then is that a meeting with the whole team, or is it meetings with management and then the team? What is it you're looking at every week to make sure that everything's in line so you can not be operational, but also maintain the standards that you are looking to uphold?
So I've literally got my calendar set out on the hour for the week, so I know exactly what I'm doing
every step.
Every step of the week, yeah. So typically on a Monday, I always do cash flow forecasting and look at the optics.
So every single month. So this is very interesting. So this is step one though. But every single Monday, the first thing you were doing, fresh week, you were looking at cash flow forecast. That's the first thing you do.
8:30 every Monday, cash flow forecast, review the optics, check the sales sheets, and then from there, what we'll do is I always speak with the managers in the morning. I have a team meeting in Cardiff, which I like to go to, just so I'm still popping in every so often. In that meeting, we're just kind of learning about member issues and stuff like that. And then, typically in the afternoon, I'll do a bit of operations or some continued education stuff. And
when mentoring gym owners, how many before they start mentoring you have come to you and they say, yeah, I'm checking the cash flow forecast every Monday at this time without fail? How if it was out of every 10 people you were to speak to, how many people are doing that beforehand?
Do you know what? I would say not that many to start with. However, the reason they come for coaching with FBD is so they can be accountable for it. So I think it's a lot higher than you think if they're going through coaching.
If they are within FBDA, most of them are doing it because that's what you teach. I think, just to reiterate the point I was looking to make, it's almost before they come to get that help, how many gym owners are already consistently checking cash flow.
How many gym owners actually have a cash flow forecast?
That's probably an even better point. How many are actually forecasting cash flow? But then you are literally looking at every single week and just keeping an eye on the business, because what gets measured gets managed, right? So would you say that's like one of the most important aspects of the business, like in terms of your role? Yeah,
for me, I cash flow is king. You can be profitable on paper, but if you haven't got cash in the bank and it's not flowing, you can go out of business really, really well. People go out of business because they don't have cash, not because they're not profitable. So it's really important to make sure you got the cash flow coming in and moving at the right kind of rates.
And how far ahead of time are you kind of forecasting for?
I typically do 12 weeks ahead.
Yeah.
That works for me. But obviously that's just about managing the flow of money.
Yeah.
When you look at other elements of the business, like with the managers, for example, we got other metrics that we look at there. Much more focused around member growth, retention rates, sales conversions, and things like that. Then,
and obviously, I stopped you on kind of step one, which is cash flow. Then you said you go into the meeting, and then you do some kind of high level work there. But your day is just 9 till 3, really, your working day. So you've got pretty
well. I try and the way I do it, obviously, because I've got the FBDA coaching. I do Mondays. I do what I class as finance and people. And then I got on a Tuesday, I do FBDA coaching. Wednesday, I do operations and marketing. And then I also do some manager meetings there if I'm needed for like upskilling. Thursday, I do FBDA coaching. And then Friday, I basically do acquisitions and wrap up.
Have you always been a person that manages their time in such an organized structure? Or is that a skill that you've had to develop? Because again, a lot of business owners are here, there, and everywhere. Yeah. It can be quite a trait of an entrepreneur to be quite chaotic. Is that something you've had to develop, or just something you always had?
I'll be honest, it's having kids. Having kids makes you so much more productive.
Yeah.
You spend your time on the things that are relevant. You say no to more, and you're on limited time to. You've only got so much time in the day before you want to be present, haven't you? So it's just, for me, it was having kids and actually understanding what are the most important things I need to focus on and just fitting it into the diary somehow. I'll be honest, I do work in the evenings sometimes. My wife's got her own business as well. So she works in the evenings, and, if I've got stuff to do, I'll just crack on and do a bit in the evening with that as well. But there's, I don't have to do it,
Yeah, I gotcha. And so we built the business, we're not operational, we're kind of making sure things are moving in the right direction and where they need to be, and we've got our team in place. how long ago was it that you acquired your first gym?
So it was post-COVID. So during COVID, obviously everybody understands what happened. We had staff in place. I wanted them to do the work and them to get paid. So they did all the coaching and everything then. I spent all my time then learning about acquisitions. So during COVID, I did a course on acquisitions, learn how to buy gyms, not necessarily gyms, but businesses, how to negotiate, and all the fundamentals around that. And then, bought the first gym, I think May 2021.
So you learned about acquisitions through COVID when you had a little bit more downtime. But at that time, you potentially were motivated for the second location. Maybe you had the business in a good spot. Obviously there was COVID, but you were thinking, I want to get a second location. So before learning about acquisition, did you think about the traditional route of a second location like most people do, which is finding another unit and going through that process and kind of starting afresh with a business from zero again? Or did you always know you wanted to do acquisition?
So I can go through the story now. So obviously during the time, like I would say we kind of just plodded along in business. When we just one location, we plodded along for a long time because we were building a family. I took my foot off the gas. We were plodding along. The business ran really well without me. So I kind of, I was happy to pay the staff that allowed me to have that freedom. But obviously we probably weren't where we needed to be financially for ourselves, me and the family. So my goal was like, the kids are growing up a little bit now. I want to accelerate my growth. I've been on pause for the last X amount of years. Now is the time to get going. All right. And then I after doing all the research and stuff, I was like, well, it took me probably like 3-4 years to get to where I am with this current location. How can I fast track that? And so, well, I'll just go and buy a business and I can buy revenue on day one. I can have a team in place. I can have a lease in place. I can have the kit in place. And I can just put my system in there and optimize it.
Yeah. So the main benefit of acquiring a business for you was actually speed to the outcome that you're looking for.
Exactly. Speed of growth. Yeah.
Because as you said, had you found another location, you've got to find the location, which takes a lot of time in itself. Then you've got to get the lease. You've got to change over the venue, build it out, kit it out, market it, pre-launch it. And before you know it, it's 3 years before you...
Sounds like a headache.
Yeah. You got to do that all over again. Whereas actually a shortcut is find a business with a very similar model to what you're already doing and purchase it. And then you've basically just cut out a huge amount of the effort that you need to make.
Hit nail on the head.
Yeah. And is it also, because, go back 10 years, if you wanted to open up a facility, you could find a space, paint the walls, add some battle ropes, some tires. You didn't have to go to, and you can still do a leaner operation right from starting a gym from scratch for sure. But it's definitely, I think you have to invest more than you used to have a gym that has the standard accepted to charge a premium fee. So it's probably more cash intensive to start from scratch, technically, not technically, potentially, than buying a business if you do it correctly.
I think in terms of a return on your cash, yes.
Yeah.
Because if you're buying a business, you got cash flow on day one. And if you got good systems in place and you buy a good business, everybody wants to buy it's much better to buy a good business than it is to buy a distressed business, because you get profits on day one. Whereas obviously if you open a location, you're going to have to put all that initial capital in to build and get your first 100 clients before you even start making any money.
Yeah. And also you can make the gyms you buy more profitable than the current gym may be. And an example being, we spoke about this off the podcast, is a lot of people will, live through the business, right? They'll have their car, they'll purchase, what it could be holidays or whatever through the business. So when you go and buy that business, you don't need to live through it. So you can actually make the business even more profitable than it already was potentially.
Yeah, exactly the case. So like you said, most people, if they've got one business and they're owner managers, they probably put a lot of expenses through the business because it's more tax efficient. Yeah. And that you get paid your dividends, and you might put your pension through there. You might put your car through there and all these other things. But as an investor, if I'm going to buy a business, obviously that owner compensation element isn't going to be part of the business once I take it over. Naturally, there's going to need to be a manager in there, so it might be that the manager salary goes up, but the owner's benefits are going to come out of it.
So first of all, we kind of talk about why your motivations to do it and all of the benefits of doing it, because it sounds like a pretty appealing thing to do, right? Don't start a new business, buy a business, and then, just put your system in, bish, bash, bosh. So obviously that's probably easier said than done, right? Because there's also some complications that go with it once you've bought the business. And I think we can go into it and just explore objectively, like, is this going to be the right thing for you? But where I want to go now is like how, because a lot of people are listening to this and they're probably thinking, although that they might run a successful business, they don't know the first thing about acquiring a business and what you should be looking for to be able to come to the conclusion that this is a viable business for me. So I guess some of the questions I'm going to ask may come across incredibly simple, but I think it's important that everyone understands. So what are the first, so you're buying a business, what are the things you're looking for? What's the first step for you on a mission to find a new gym to buy?
Okay, I'm going to backtrack a little bit, because I think first of all, before you even go down that route, you need to make sure that location one is running smoothly and you're able to be out of that business for a prolonged period of time.
And do you think that principle applies to wherever you are acquiring a new gym or just starting a new gym? Do you think that principle needs to apply? Number one,
needs to a second location.
Yes, yeah. So it doesn't matter whether I'm going to acquire or actually just start a new one. Location one needs to be as optimized as possible, as profitable as possible, as systematized as possible before I look to focus my energy on here.
100%, yeah, definitely. Because otherwise, what's going to happen if your business A is relying on you, to do things like sales calls and all these other things like that, and then you go into business B, that's going to dilute your time 50% straight away. So that all those other day-to-day operations need to be fulfilled.
And I know that you've rewinded. I'm going to fast forward and then we're going to go back. But again, something else you told me is that you've acquired two businesses and you were going to kind of go full steam ahead on buying more, but you decided to stop. And the reason why was...
Yeah, so Nicky Segal is my coach as well as a colleague at FBDA. But he challenged me. He said, you need to optimize what you've got right now before going for the next round of acquisitions. And that's what we did. We spent a year basically refining our systems, installing new processes as well, just to make things much more optimized to boost the profitability of both companies. We've done that over the last year, and we're literally now in a state where we're ready to go.
Awesome. So again, going back to what you said, so number one, making sure that first location is optimized as possible. So is there anything that we have missed in this conversation that you did to make it as efficient as it could be before you went on to start the acquisition process?
Yeah, I think having clear expectations from your staff and what their roles are, so client care know that they're going to do sales and communication and some social stuff. The manager knows they need to run the day-to-day, making sure that everything's fulfilled, dealing with overtime and all those kind of things. But also they need to be bringing ideas, like innovative ideas on how to further grow the business in that sense. The coaches coach, they turn up, they need to follow our processes for teaching great sessions. And then, we've got like the other departments there, which are probably, I would say these are above the group, above the entity. So like the finance department, like the graphic design, all these other elements as well, they need fulfilling too.
And how do you set those expectations?
Just scorecards. You get a scorecard. This is your role. These are your top 3 objectives and the KPIs. This is what looks good. This is what doesn't look good.
And this is what you need to be consistently hitting.
Yeah, and then when you're having your meetings, just reviewing. Hey, these are your goals for the month. How are you getting on? Right. If there's an issue, okay, what do we need to do differently to hit that target? And
just to really simplify this, it might sound like a very simple question, but like when you say a scorecard, where is that placed? Is it physical,
okay, yeah,
virtual? So how does it all?
Scorecard is fundamentally a job description.
Yeah.
Right, but with key outcomes. So your scorecard, let's say for example, for a manager, their scorecard might be, all right, we need you at 98% retention. 6 added recurring members per month. That they're 2 elements of a score.
I need to hit these 2 metrics. Whatever I do to achieve it is fine. Just go. That's your focus, basically. Yeah. Okay. Nice. Cool. And you set those. And did you set those at probably the start of the their employment, right? You would do it at the
so
end.
generally it'll be, and we review every quarter. So every quarter, so my role now is mentoring the managers. All right, so they do like the PDIs with the staff. I work hands on with the managers. So like that's kind of where my kind of role and vision is now. When we get more gyms into the group, I will work solely with the managers and upskill them to a level where they become great business owners.
Yes, they come on board. These are your scorecards, and then every quarter they're reviewed. And are they reviewed because, one, if they're not being hit, how do we hit them? Or two, if they are being hit quite easily, how do we actually increase the standard potentially?
Yeah, and also I think people need to know if they're winning.
Yeah.
You know, in business, it's like a sport, isn't it? If you don't know if you're winning, you don't know if you're doing well.
Yeah.
So like you can't stay motivated and hungry for it.
Amazing. So expectations set, business is operational, the best it can be. Let's move into, I know the business is good. I've ticked that box. Moving into acquisition. What's my first, like, what was your process of looking around, and like, how did you find the first gym that you bought?
So first of all, I think you need to set up what I call a buy box. So what's your buy box look like? So like what kind of gym do you want? Is that the route you're going to go down? Because you could buy a gym, but also you could buy a beauty salon around the corner if you think it's going to work in terms of like cross referral and things like that. So what is it you're looking to buy? Is it maybe a 24-hour gym? Is it a coaching-based gym? Is it more of a health club kind of thing? You need to understand what you're looking for. I would definitely say if you're ever going to do acquisitions, to start with, do it where you're located relatively close to you.
Yeah.
Only because if there are problems and you need to go down there, obviously
you can go and sort that out.
You can. And then just making sure it's not too small. You know, if it's sub VAT threshold, you know, like you're gonna have to put a lot of change in there on completion because the goal is to grow it. Yeah.
Yeah.
And naturally, that's 20% of your bills going on the VAT.
So you have a criteria of end gyms you want to approach before you actually approach them, which is like they're above the VAT threshold. They've been around for a certain period of time.
Yeah. Typically, I like to look at businesses that have you know, a good brand, you know, and a good reputation. So I'm looking at companies which have been around for 5-6 years plus. You know, obviously they're not always the case, and sometimes we look at deals where they're younger as well. But generally, if you think about business, right, I think I don't know what the stat is itself, but like in terms of startups, I think something like 80% of startups fail. Yeah, so if you can, within the first 3 years, that is. So if you can find, say, businesses that have been operating from, say, 4 or 5 years plus, they've already passed that pain threshold.
So yeah, from like a risk reward factor, they're kind of past the main bulk of the risk technically because they've made it through that
exactly.
stage. So that gives you more.
You're
certainty.
working with the top 20% then, aren't you?
Yeah, that makes complete sense. And then, so you have your criteria. This is the gym I want to work, like the model I want to work with. They should be this long. They should be around for this long. They should be at least hitting this revenue marker, so they're past the VAT threshold. Then, in terms of like approaching the, like, is there, again, it's going to sound like very simple, but the person you bought the gym from, are they like advertising they're selling the gym, or are you approaching the gym? Like, what's the step that you take to initiate potential conversations to buy gyms?
Generally, people don't advertise to sell a gym.
Yeah.
All right. And if they do, they probably will never sell because they'll go through a broker and they'll give them an extortionate price, and they'll just never sell.
And just a side note, so is going for a broker if you're going to sell a gym probably not advised?
If you look at brokers, right? They're like estate agents. Okay, if they say I can sell your gym for 100,000, all right, and then you got broker B over here said I'll sell your gym for 300,000. Who are you going to go with?
Yeah, broker B.
But will they sell the gym for 300,000? You know, a lot of people will give you extorted expectations when it comes, because basically brokers get paid on the sign up. When you get signed, hey, you pay us X amount of money, and we'll you know, show your company to all these potential buyers out there. But fundamentally, you're just paying to be listed.
Yeah. So it's typically the gyms you're approaching aren't advertising. So you're approaching them.
I do outreach.
And so what does that outreach look like? So just for the specific example of the first person in the first gym, like what did that outreach look like?
Yeah. So typically I'll view like radius on look at different gyms and stuff like that.
And so you're doing it close to your radius as well, as you mentioned.
Yeah.
and your Google Maps or whatever
Simple,
it is.
Google Maps, Google My Business, gyms around here and stuff like that. Like the way I look at it, I was originally started in the Southwest, and my goal is to move inwards.
Yeah.
As that happens, so I've got like a little line from like obviously Cardiff up to say South England of where I'd be happy to purchase.
Yeah.
So I'll just kind of do research, looking at what's out there, and then I'll reach out. I'll have a reach out via, generally I'll send a letter because it's private, it's confidential. That they're going to get them themselves rather than.
It's also more serious to receive a letter versus like an Instagram DM, right?
Yeah.
You got to see this.
And also, if somebody is looking to sell, right, like you don't know who's managing their ads or their Instagram. You don't want to be sending something like that to a staff member.
Yes.
It's a very personal and confidential thing when you want to sell a business. People generally they sell a business because they're in a transition stage. They've had enough of what they're doing. It might be that they've want to move on to new ventures. All kinds of different reasons.
So you go Google My Business, find a list of businesses. Like did you have like a number of businesses that you went, these look potentially good, and I'm gonna send out some correspondence to these people?
Yeah, generally I look at I get a data list based on my criteria. Once I get the data list, I'll review it because I know what I want, and I'll look through the bases, and I'll send X amount of letters out each week. And I get lots of phone calls, and it's great. But I know some companies literally, or like business buyers and investors, they will literally get a data list of 20,000, and they'll send them a black batch thing. For me, I'd rather send letters to people I'm actually interested in.
You're a little bit more targeted.
Yeah, so I don't mind investing that time if it's going to mean it's going to save me time jumping on calls with people who aren't going to be a good fit.
And before you've sent them the letter, have you just looked at their website, seen their model, or have you done a little bit extra digging to make sure they meet the criteria? Yeah,
typically I'll do a bit of commercial due diligence on the business. Like you said, you check them out on socials, look at the website, check the company's house and things like that as well, just to see if it looks like it's going to be a good fit on paper.
Perfect. And then you send that letter, and it just says, generally speaking, you have to say word for word, but what is the general premise of the letter kind of?
But basically, I give a bit about my background. This is who I am. This is where I'm going. Our goal is to build a group of gyms. We're looking to add X amount of gyms this year. Have you ever thought about it? Would you like a conversation?
And even if someone never thought about selling their gym before that, they're probably going to be inclined to have that conversation, right? Because they might have some curiosity about.
I literally speak twice a week to businesses. Business owners who are either potentially looking to sell, or if they're not looking to sell, they want more information. And quite often, I have people who say, "Well, I'm not ready now, but however, I will get in touch."
So it's valuable, because obviously these aren't overnight situations that take place. So it's valuable to have these conversations for both people. So they phone you, you have a conversation, and then is there, because obviously you've done it 3 times, well nearly 3 times now. Is there like a little bit like, let's say, a client for a gym opts in, they have a phone call, they have a consultation, they go through the pros. There's like a system in place they have. Is there a structure of communication that then takes place? So
absolutely,
you outreach, you research, you outreach, you have a conversation, and then during that initial conversation, you're not going, I want to buy a gym for $100,000. You're not throwing offers out there, right? So what does that initial conversation look like?
You hit the nail on the head. It's sales and marketing. You do your direct mail. That's your outbound to get your prospects. Yeah, they put their hand up. I want a conversation. We have the conversation. I qualify based on what hits my criteria, and those I can share that typically is they need a long-term lease in place. I don't like rolling leases. Nobody likes them.
What lease length for you? They need to have minimum
5.
5 years. So
ideally,
5 years left on the lease.
Ideally,
yeah.
Only because let's say you buy a business for X amount of money, and then there's only a year's left on the lease. You need to make that money back within that year. Otherwise, they could throw you out.
Yeah.
So, so typically, if it's less, I would look at renegotiating the lease to extend that.
And so on that first phone call, what sort of, because you've had you've already kind of qualified them on your own due diligence before speaking to them. What further information are you looking for on the call?
So first of all, like that first call is understanding, is there a deal to be made, or is it worth pursuing the next step?
Yeah.
Right. So just remember, at this stage, there's no like non-disclosure agreements being signed or anything. So we're not going into details.
To nitty gritty.
Yeah. So fundamentally, I'd want to know, tell me about the business and, how it's progressed. Where's the current situation? If they don't mind sharing, I might get numbers, top end numbers. You give me a vague number of turnover for the last year or profit levels. Tell me about the team. How is it run? What do you do in the business? And then if I think it's viable and ready for a next conversation, I'll say, okay, great. Let me send you over an NDA for obviously confidentiality reasons, and then I will request a certain amount of information then, which I will do a deep dive into. Yeah,
nice. And within the, obviously you don't need to go into actual specific metrics, but within the deep dive, so you've had the phone call, you've gone, this person's interested, so we can move this forward. There's signs that they're matching the criteria. It's looking interesting. I send out the NDA, they sign. I've now got some information so I can now do a deep dive. What am I looking for that's either going to qualify or disqualify this process?
Okay, so first of all, I'm looking at, is there a team in place? I don't want a job, so I want a fully functioning team.
So essentially, like where you had your first business and it was operational without you, is it the same situation? Like, or is it, is this person on the coaching floor a lot? Is that what you're saying?
If I give you the ideal scenario, now I'll be honest, most owners I speak to don't have the ideal scenario. However,
but it's good to know what the ideal scenario is. So yeah,
so the ideal scenario is to have a long-term lease in place, to have a fully functional team running the day-to-day, running the business, having a manager that oversees that, and then having maybe like an owner who provides strategic insights and guidance, and may do little bits in the gym, but not solely reliant in one position. Yeah. That would be the perfect scenario, and obviously profitable. If it's profitable, it's much easier to finance it, and it's much easier and better to buy a profitable business than a distressed business.
Yeah, and so that's the 100% sort of gold star standard of what would be for you. But as you said, most people don't have that gold standard.
So typically what happens is you look at a gym, they're on a rolling lease or on a year's lease. Their owner managing, they're doing 20 hours of coaching themselves. They're the salesperson, they're the admin person, and there's no infrastructure. Like that business is not sellable.
Yeah. And if it was, let's say it was, they were off the coaching floor, they had someone doing sales, they weren't that operational, but it was a rolling lease, would that still be a big red flag for you?
Absolutely, yeah. So that would need negotiating to fulfill a deal.
Yeah, because otherwise you could buy it and then the next day it could just be term. Yeah,
it could be literally it's dead.
Yeah. So it sounds like there is a all of those things that you said, like most people are doing this, and it's not a good sign. There's some things that are more important than others. So like that lease factor is going to be very important.
Yeah, and I understand why people have rolling leases or short leases, because if somebody's goal as an owner, they don't, if you're tied into something, it's a lot of commitment.
Yeah.
So if you want to keep your options open, it makes sense to have a short lease.
Yeah.
But for an investor, a short lease is probably the worst possible thing you could have.
Yeah. I guess what I'm trying to get at is that there's all these things that are kind of red or maybe amber flags, let's say. Are there some situations where they might not tick all the boxes, but it's still viable? But because there's something there that might affect the value of the sale potentially.
Exactly. So let's say, for example, there's no manager in place.
Yeah. And you go, I need a manager and I'm going to have to pay for this.
Which is fine, but obviously that then affects the purchase price.
Yeah.
But then obviously if you haven't got a manager in place, you might say, well, actually, do you have someone on the team who's been there, who's loyal, who would really benefit from stepping into a mentorship role and be mentored into a great manager? Because ideally that would be a great next step for them.
So actually, yeah. So rather than bringing in a new hire, which is a whole new expense, you could develop someone and give them a pay rise, which would also help them in terms of the sale negotiations, but also help you simultaneously to make sure the business is viable.
During any kind of acquisition or any takeover, the key importance is actually ensuring stability of the staff and the clientele and the operation itself. So you don't want to be going in making tons of changes. Here's your manager now. You now report to this. It's much better to have somebody who already knows, likes, and trusts the whole team and the clients, who can step into that next role and then develop their leadership.
So that's actually a preferred option to level up someone internally rather than bring someone, because someone externally could potentially rock the boat, right?
Exactly. Yeah. Ideal scenario is to have a gym that's running smoothly, and you just optimize the back end.
Yeah. And what I'm running through these things here. They've got a long lease. They're not that operational in the business. They've got a manager. They've got someone doing assisting with sales. You know, they're still in the business slightly, but not majorly. Like they're ticking a lot of boxes. How are you then valuing the business in terms of how are you valuing the business?
Okay, so single site settings typically sell between 1 and 2.5 times multiple of profits.
Yeah, so it's 1.5 or 2.5 times multiple of profit, not revenue. Because some people, you know, who make like they go, oh, it's it's 5 times revenue or whatever it is. So
right, let's put it this way, right? Let's say a business is profiting, or let's say that it's 5 times revenue. Let's say it's a small business.
Yeah.
All right, 5 times revenue is 500,000. Right, 500,000 for a business that is only turnover 100,000, right? And let's say that's profiting 20k a year. Right? How long would it take an investor to get their money back?
Yeah, you've got to wait.
That's what 20k divided by 500,000.
20k. Yeah, so you get 100k profit in 5 years. Is it like 10?
It'd be like 50 years before you get any money back. It's ridiculous. So in the way you look at it, any business should be valued at the investor once they get their money out within 3 years.
Yeah.
All right. So if you base it on that, right?
And so that's another criteria for you. Can I get my money back in 3 years from this business?
As a maximum, yeah.
Yeah, maximum. Okay, cool. Yeah. Cool. And so you're looking at that profit, and it's a 1.5 to 2.5. Is there a factor of why it would be 1.5 rather than 2.5? Because that's quite a big difference, right?
Those elements I shared earlier, the long-term lease, the manager in place,
so
all those reasons will affect the multiple.
Yeah, I got you. So that's going to be effective of, that's going to change it, and then it's going to come in there. And then, so I've gone through the details, I've looked at it, they're profitable, and this is a business that I think I can get a return on maximum within that 3-year limit. What's the next step in terms of creating an offer? How does that look? Is it like, here's a big bag of money and I'm going to buy it? Again, I'm simplifying the question because I'm sure people are eager to know how they would be paid or offered, or what does that look like? So like you're now in a position where you're willing to make me an offer. From that, what does that next step look like?
So first of all,
or have I missed a step actually before?
Yeah, you have missed a step.
Okay, cool.
And that comes to the initial due diligence part, and that's where generally I'm going to be looking at things like the profit and loss, the bank statements and stuff like that. I want to see what the cash flow of the business is, and then I will then make it work on paper, or I won't make it work on paper. If it doesn't work on paper, it's a no deal. Right? Yeah, and that as me putting in a manager, making sure that I'd strip back any expenses that I don't feel are necessary. I'd make it work on how I'm going to run the business, and if I can make it work, and that kind of fundamentally allows me to make an offer based on what I can finance. Yeah.
So so you get all the information. You're then looking at all of that, and then there's extra due diligence, as you just mentioned, in terms of you're actually going to take all that information they provided and you're going to model it. Basically, you're going to run through what it currently is and what it could be if I was to make changes. And have you done scenarios where you've just gone through and you go, this doesn't viably work? Like this business isn't going to work like this at all. Yeah.
I chat weekly to business owners. I'm always reviewing P&Ls. I'm always doing cash flow forecasts and stuff. There's tons of business out there which won't work because fundamentally there's not enough money in the business.
It must be quite valuable to them for you to go, look, this isn't going to work, and here's why. You need to increase this or this price point.
So I'll share the example with the first acquisition we made. It wasn't viable, and I said, hey, in order to this to be sellable, you need a manager in place, you need a longer lease, and you need your members. Ideally, I want them contracted rather than month to month.
Yeah.
You go away and do that, and then we can have a conversation. And we did.
And they went and did that, yeah.
And the business was in a much better place when we had that second conversation.
So even if they didn't sell it, the business would still be in a better place for it, basically.
Exactly,
yeah. And you mentioned contracted versus month to month. Now, is that 60 days notice, or is it 12 months? Like what like from a buyer's perspective?
Yeah, a buyer's perspective, if you have a 12-month contract, it adds that much more stability there. However, we all know that even if people are in 12-month contracts, they can leave at 6 months, and you're not probably going to chase them up anyway.
Yeah.
But as long as there's some sort of contracted place in there, and it shows that there's loyalty within the community base. But that loyalty thing actually is maybe something to talk about. So the loyalty to the business can sometimes people will sell that to you as a seller. Oh, they're really loyal, but quite often, for example, if it's a really like owner managed business where they're doing lots of coaching, they're loyal to the coach and the owner, as soon as that coach not leaves, necessarily the new buyer. So that's why it's really important to make sure you don't mess with the team so much, and making sure the team are fulfilling more of the sessions because they have more loyalty to the company then rather than to the owner.
And there's a way to identify that just based on the fact, are they doing lots of coaching? Because if they're saying they're really loyal, our retention is this, but I'm coaching half the sessions, it's like, well, is the retention good because of the business you've built, which is the thing without you? Or is it
people buy people?
Yeah.
Don't they?
Yeah.
And if you move the people, what happens?
So you actually might go to that person like, look, you've got to get off the gym floor and not be as operational. And if retention's in a similar range, then this works. But if
that could be an option. We were chatting last week, I think, to a gym in the Southwest, and they love coaching. And I'm like, well, there's options here. If you want to stay in the business, I'll give you a salary. You can continue to coach. I'll run a business. You continue to coach and fulfill your passion, but get paid a good wage for it, rather than scrimping just to make sure you're paying your staff and everything, and not taking anything as an owner. And
have you had that situation where you've bought or are buying a gym and they actually might stay within the business, but as a very well paid employee at all? Or
I've had lots of conversations around that. However, we haven't come to that yet.
Yeah.
But it's definitely an angle to look at, because with fitness, people get into fitness because they're passionate about helping people in fitness. Yeah, they don't want to be business owners.
Yeah, they
fall into it.
They go from like a corporate desk job to become a personal trainer, to get a gym, to then go behind a desk again. So to be a successful gym owner, you've kind of got to do the thing that a lot of people.
That's why I think more so in the fitness industry, you get a lot of people who they just haven't got the business skill set, and they got the passion, they understand how the gyms work and stuff, and they understand how to coach and give people results, but they don't understand the fundamentals of business. And that's kind of where people, start to think about, what are my next steps? I can't make the business work. It's not working for me. I'm not getting what I want out of it. And then what's the next step then?
And so you've done your due diligence, you've modeled it out, you can see it's viable. There might be a few things that need ironed out, but you've addressed those and everything looks good. And you're now, is there any steps that I've missed from that point, or is it now it's time to put an offer?
Yeah, so generally, once you've done the initial due diligence, you're doing yourself. You're not paying lawyers or accountants to do anything like that.
You're then passing it on to
I've got a team who I work with closely, and they can give me feedback with. But then typically, once you can work on paper, you can understand how you can finance it. Once you figured out how much you can finance, you can go with an offer, and the offer is basically, fundamentally, you need to collaborate. People have their needs. And I'd much rather present an offer that's going to suit both parties.
Yeah,
so I like Nikki Segal loves this as well. Is the triple win scenario? Yeah,
yeah.
It's got to be a win for the seller. It has to be a win for the buyer. It has to be a win for the company and the team.
100%.
And you only get that just by collaborating, really.
And to just to quickly circle back to, you mentioned like, now I've got to finance it. So are you using your own capital, or are you going somewhere to get investment, or how is it?
There's 100 ways to skin a cat here.
Yeah.
But like it typically, because I have fundamental businesses which are already profitable, I can draw finance on those easily. Yeah. If the business is quite asset heavy, you can get asset finance and stuff like that. There's also you can get acquisition based finance as well from other companies out there. There's tons of different ways to do it, and also you can get external investors if need be. There's so many different avenues.
I gotcha. So you do due diligence, you go through the team that kind of go over everything a bit more forensically. Is that fair to say?
So once you when you put an offer in, you sign what you call heads of terms, which is the outline of what the deal looks like. You get X on day one, X over say next 2 to 3 years. And then what will then happen is that's when you pay and instruct your solicitor and your accountant then to dig into the numbers in a bit more detail and checked it for any red flags, like any,
And are you coming up with that offer, or again, you're speaking with the business owner, and are you trying to work out, like, or are you going to this person and saying, look, based on everything that I've seen and I've gone through, this is what I believe this is worth, and this is what I will offer you initially, and then is there some...
To a certain degree, yes. However, depending on the size of the business, it sometimes comes down to actually just what the owner needs.
Yeah.
If they need X so they can go and do, I don't know, let's say they want to go on a round the world travel or whatever, and they need X amount of money to do that, right? It's a case of, well, if this is what you need, then that's fundamentally the only kind of figure you're going to have if you want a deal, right? We look at it, how can we structure it to facilitate that? And if it's not financeable, it's a no-goer. And
so actually, rather than you going, here's what I offer, you say to this person, like, what is it you're looking for, but potentially in terms of like cash and what it looks like long term, and then they'll say that, and then you'll see if you can find something, as you said, that provides the triple win.
Exactly, and you need to be a collaboration, because you want, obviously the seller needs to be happy, you need to be happy, the team need to be happy. As long as you hit those three elements, that's the sign of a good deal.
And typically, how does it work in terms of when you've come to an amount and you're paying them? Is it an initial lump up front?
Yes, it's funny actually.
What does it all look like?
People think like, oh yeah, when I get business, sell my business for, I don't know, say 500,000 or £1 million, I'm going to get it all on day one.
That's what I was, when I said like a big bag of money or a briefcase, but typically it's not like that, right? So
you look like the likes of Google and Facebook and Amazon and stuff. They're buying businesses left, right, and centre. They're not paying on day one. They're basically giving them an initial amount of rent, and they're paying the rest over maybe a 3 to 5 year period.
And is there a specific percentage, or again, does it depend on the
It depends on the deal here. So typically, if I'm looking at a business, I'm not going to be putting more than 30 to 40% up on day one, because if there's any skeletons in the closet which you need to recoup down the line, it's a lot easier to do it if there's what they call deferred payments elements.
Yeah, I got you. So 40 to 30%, so they can get that paid. Then something you mentioned here is that skeletons in the closet later on down the line. So you could sign and agree and pay, and then you get the keys, and then there's something that's jumped out at you that you're not aware of, even after all of the research and legwork you've done, right?
Like it hasn't happened to me in particular, but I've heard of horror stories, in my network and things like that. We had one guy where basically they bought a business, and what happened then? Basically the owner went onto Facebook and said, "I'm closing the business." And it wasn't a gym; it was like a childcare business. And he said, "I'm closing the business," and then all the customers like left and everything. And he was like, "Well,"
so he's done some awful PR basically. But even though he was selling, he said, So
obviously, it's not closed. The business is still running. There's just a new management team in there.
Yeah.
And obviously that caused an absolute nightmare. They lost tons of obviously customers and revenue and things like that.
And then does that affect the buyer because as you said, like, you're paying an initial sum, but then later on down the line, just in case. So is there, as a buyer, is there like a just in case clause, or is it like now it's signed, it's done, or?
So fundamentally, it needs to be financeable, but like at the same time, you don't want to put all your eggs into one basket. If you put all the money on day one, and let's say, for example, there's a liability of 10k HMRC debt which wasn't shared, well, you then got to go back to the seller and say, hey, there's a 10k debt here. You need to pay it back to the company so you can pay it off. Whilst they're off, I don't know, sunning themselves in Ibiza or whatever, it makes it difficult. So it's just, there needs to be an element of security on both parts. And fundamentally, the seller wants security from the owner that they're not going to run it into the ground.
Yeah.
But at the same time, the buyer doesn't necessarily know what they're getting until they get the keys. So there needs to be an element of security for that as well.
And how long does this entire process take from the initial outreach to that? Is there a range?
Really depends.
This is not like a set timeline, but
I bought a business in 4 weeks, and I've bought a business in 10 weeks, and I've negotiated on a business for 6 months, which ended up not going through.
Yeah.
So it's really dependent. But I've got a team in place, so I've got the ability to move fast if necessary. But it's really it's all down to the circumstances, and that's where you need to collaborate together and understand the right.
And so it does sound like there is definitely legwork and work that you need to do this. But do you think it's less work than getting a new gym and starting from zero?
Yes, I'd never start a gym from scratch again. Only because I like to go fast, and it's the fastest way to do it is through acquisition.
Great. So you've kind of ran through this process of being able to buy a gym. Is there anything we've missed off there at all, or have we kind of, generally speaking, ran through start to finish process?
You can't. Where were we? We were at.
We were kind of talking about after the sales being made, and if there is anything wrong, and having that security.
So, buying a gym is, I'd probably say, the easy part. The integration is the hardest part. How you integrate. There's no longer an owner in there. You need to build those relationships with the team. You need to ensure that there's certainty across the board. So this is where the real hard work comes, because if they're using different systems than you're used to as well, you need to either streamline them or you need to learn them.
Yeah, so let's talk about like the cons of buying a gym, or the challenges, let's say, because obviously you're buying someone else's brand, someone else's community. It's a person-to-person business, and you're another person coming in, and there's another person exiting the business. And as that example you gave outside the industry, it can potentially be detrimental if they know that person's leaving. That's the question. How do you have a way that you manage that transition to make sure you don't have that situation where the owner goes, I'm off, and lots of people leave? Is there a specific thing that you do, or what does that look like?
Obviously, I've got experience doing it now, so I have like a list of everything that we need to do.
Because there's like a PR process to this.
Yeah, on that list would be a case of letting the team know, making sure the key people are on board with.
And are you meeting the key people before the purchase? And
naturally, yeah. So let's say you've got somebody stepping into a manager position, you need to be having that conversation way before you complete, just to make sure that they're the right person to step in and they're on board with your vision. Then, in terms of customers, that doesn't really happen until day one, until you complete.
Do you tell the current owner not to make a big announcement? Do you say, I'd rather, do you know what I mean? There's that horror story you made, like, do you want a quiet transition, or do you want, is it? Yeah,
so typically you're not going to get a quiet transition in an owner, but
everyone's going to find out, right? Yeah.
If, for example, let's say you're buying a big health club, right, and it's got 45 staff, okay, you could probably have a quieter transition then. An email went out, we got a new owner, right? That would be fine. But if you got an owner managed business where actually they're part of the culture and everything, and they built it from scratch, they fundamentally the owner's going to want to exit saying bye to their customers who are their long-term friends and things. So it's about just managing it, making sure that you need to ease any uncertainty on all parts. That's staff, that's customers, because they can be worried about change as well, and then you need to draw the picture of what the future looks like.
Yeah, nice. And then in terms of like you've moved in, and you said, is your goal to get all the systems to align with another? Because like, let's say they use one booking software, you use another. Is it okay to have different ones, or do you want to get them
I've been through a few systems in my past, so I'm pretty well versed on most of the systems out there in terms of when it comes to a CRM or even like scheduling systems and stuff like that. So if I understand it, it would be a case of it works. If there's cost savings or if there's functionality issues which need addressing, it might be that we move it to a different provider. And then obviously like things with the CRM and stuff, they just come under my brand and we just duplicate it, and we've got a system set up.
I got you. So you've now got a replicatable system, but beforehand it might have had a bit of a team.
Yeah, so that year I spent optimizing the business and systematizing things. We were building out, like, obviously we've got websites set up where we've got a full marketing kind of platform, the sales pipeline and all that set up, which we can kind of just install on day one.
So going back to that transition, when you buy the gym, do you ever project a slight dip in earnings initially because of potentially people leaving, because of the owner is no longer there? There might be some loyal customers that dip. So are you forecasting for an initial dip, because inevitably that may happen?
Yeah. So when I do my initial forecast, I'm forecasting on I talked about making it work on paper. I try and make sure it works on paper with that expected dip.
Yeah. Okay. So
if it retained where it's at, and it can work great, but then it also has to work on when the expected, let's say you lose 10% of memberships, it needs to work on that.
You actually have to create quite a pessimistic forecast.
I think it's sensible to.
Yeah, for sure, because inevitably that may happen when in a person-to-person business. And what challenges have you had with gyms that you've bought? Because I know that one of the gyms you've actually merged in Cardiff, right? You've merged them into one location essentially. So what was your? But there was still benefit to buying the business, right? So what was the thought process behind merging the gyms together, and what were the challenges you had within that process?
Okay, so if we go to the Bristol gym, right? We didn't. That was a completely.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, let's focus on the Bristol gym because that's the first one. But
yeah, so that was a completely separate entity.
Yeah.
And we didn't change anything. Like first 6 months, we didn't change anything at all. Just
let it run.
Nothing on the front. Just optimize the back end.
And is it important to do that?
Yeah.
Because when you're buying a business, you don't want to go day one, right? We're changing this, we're changing that, because you essentially want to keep the ship as steady as possible.
Exactly. You want to keep it as steady as possible. My kind of process is I'll change the things which aren't client facing, and optimize the back end stuff. Or optimize the processes that maybe the sales team are using and things
all
like
the things
that.
behind the scenes that no one's really going to see.
And then, when we got our feet under the desk at 6 months, you might say, okay, well, now we'll do some things which are a bit more external. Now, if it's a good business, you can do that. If it's a business which isn't so good, or it's struggling and it needs, a lot of change quickly, that might be a different scenario. But it's always easier from an integration perspective to just keep things minimal when it comes to changing. Yeah.
And I guess in that time, you're kind of assessing the brand equity and the loyalty of the clients. And then you can go, right, now we can make a change to this based on kind of how it's been so far. So what was the first changes you made after that 6 month period?
So the changes initially, we just basically, we improved like the pre-qual script and stuff. We adjusted, we adjusted like the price and packaging for new members coming on board, but not the existing members. So at that 6 month stage, that's when we introduced I understood the business, and that's when we introduced the hybrid model of one-times and classes.
And you mentioned that they're all separate, that it's a separate entity, and the business is under an umbrella, but it is a separate business. It's not you've got two locations and it's one business, right? Yeah. And what was your thought process behind having them as separate entities?
Mitigate risk. So as we talked earlier about how landlords can come and double your rent at the break clause, or they can tell you to leave after a certain amount of time. If you've got separate entities, that you can just close that business down, and then it's not going to affect your other business. And
it's not going to necessarily be the end of the. It's obviously it would be a hit, but it's not going to be the end of the world if one goes down because they're all separate, right? Whereas if you've got one entire business and then the landlord closes one down overnight, that could potentially impact the other business without realizing.
Yeah. Also, let's say you had 4 gyms, right, or 5 gyms, all under one business, and you got, let's say somebody puts a lawsuit against you, all right, and then you can't afford to pay the lawsuit because you've been sued. The whole company is broke. It's gone.
Whereas if one just shut down, it can't afford to pay it.
Problem solved.
Yeah. That's it. So you're eliminating risk as well. That's probably what I imagine when you're acquiring. You're looking, how can I minimize the risk of this?
Yeah. Also, I guess obviously not all businesses are going to work, and if some don't work, it might be a case where you need to exit that business in some case. And if it's a separate entity, it's a lot easier to sell a business which has its own softwares and everything than it is to, all right, well, we got 4 locations over here. We need to separate the software. We need to separate the wage bill, and then we need to separate the business before we can sell it. See how much of a headache that would be.
And in terms of your like risk tolerance towards buying businesses, you said some businesses might not work, and this is just me with an assumption because you sounded quite stoic when you were saying that. And when you do buy a business, are you going in with a partial possibility, going, it might not work, but going back to that, I'm not putting all my eggs in one basket thing. If it didn't work, it's not the end of the world for you and your business ventures.
Yeah, exactly. And the lease thing is probably the most important thing. And we spoke earlier about a friend we knew in the past. His business was shut overnight because the landlord said he didn't want him in there.
It was doing well,
it was
right?
doing well.
Yeah.
You know, but it'll actually from next month you got to be out of the business. What are you going to do?
Yeah,
you got to go and find a new location.
Yeah.
I've got a client now at FBD, and he's just been told like he's got like a 40% increase on his rents. So he's now looking at other options of finding a new location.
Yeah.
You know, I don't want to have somebody who can just kind of, pull the rug from beneath me. So having multiple enterprises for me just mitigates the risk.
And did you keep the branding of the gym in Bristol, or did you keep it the same? And
I kept it the same. It had a great reputation, really good reputation in the area.
Do it, yeah.
Like the way I look at it is, my role when I'm buying gyms and businesses is to optimize the back end of it, and to mentor the managers into great leaders.
So you're not your vision isn't to build like a chain of BFits or anything
not
like
necessarily,
that. You'd be happy if you had a number of gyms that were all under different brands but had great reputations in their local area. Yeah.
So like I did, they'll still be kind of powered by or part of the BFit brand, and we can utilize lots of resources that we can kind of pass down. However, you know, if it's got a great brand, that we talked about how long it takes to build that brand loyalty, like takes like up to 3 years sometimes. So why would you ruin that if it's got a great brand in place?
Yeah.
I'll be honest though, if there's a business which isn't doing very well or has a poor brand, you know, it would be a case of we'd rebrand on day one.
Yeah. And have we covered enough of the Bristol one to go back to the Cardiff, or to go to the Cardiff?
Yeah. So I think the reason we went back to that was about the transition and
the changes that you made.
So obviously with the Bristol gym, we just kept things running smoothly. So the Cardiff was a completely different scenario because we merged into one location.
And did you know that you were going to merge them initially, or was that a decision?
The plan was originally to take on a second location, but for a number of reasons, during due diligence, it wasn't viable.
Yeah.
And you know,
that was during due diligence. You went, it's not viable to have this as a, so before the buy went, you went, I'm actually going to merge these gyms together. Is that right?
No, so originally I was going to run them separate entities.
Yes, yeah.
And I was going to basically just run the model separately. After due diligence, I was looking at it, and it was probably going to be, it wouldn't have worked as efficiently doing it that way. So we decided to merge it into our current location in Cardiff. Yeah.
But there's still value in buying the business without the building, right? Because you've got the client base, the database, all the repair revenue that came in.
Exactly. So fundamentally, from our perspective, they were probably our biggest competitor in the space. So we removed the competitor.
Yeah.
You know, we took on the staff that were a good fit. The staff we took on is now our manager at Cardiff. So, you know, when you acquire companies, you can get some great people as well. Yeah,
such an interesting point. Like how do you knock out your biggest competitor? Buy them.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Why not?
Yeah. So in the process of merging those gyms together, were there any challenges because there's two different brands and cultures there?
Yeah, big time. So, and I think merging would only be done at a last resort, I think, going forwards, just due to cultural change. You know, like if you're selling, you know, longer term memberships at a higher price point, and then you merge with a company where all the customers are maybe price shoppers, or they like, you know, they come in, they want to train 20 times a week for the lowest amount of cost. There's a bit of a mess up there in terms of what the values are.
I got you. So
it was more a case of, I think the buy-in mindset of the customer wasn't quite fit to how we kind of sell.
So is it because you had your gym, which was higher price point, the other gym, which was, I think, a lower price point?
Yeah, theirs was more of a group exercise, whereas ours was more focused on semi-private with the group elements.
And did their rates increase when they moved in, or?
No, we kept everything the same. So
cool.
Obviously we talk about how to keep things as stable as possible. We kept all the rates as they were. We're at a point now where we've now said, I think we're about maybe almost 2 years now since that acquisition, but we're now reaching out and saying, hey, the rates are now aligned with what our current rates are.
Yeah. And so that was a number 2, and then you've got number 3 in the process. So are you now at a point where both of those locations are kind of at, like, ticking along nicely? They're at a good point. Well, it sounds like they are. You know, 35% profit margins, right?
Yeah. Well, owner comp and net profit, yeah, 35%.
So some people may have heard of this, but some people haven't. So when you're looking at that profit margin, you're placing the profit, but also the owner compensation together, and it should equate to 33%, correct?
Well, the sweet spot is 33%.
The sweet spot is 33%.
If you can get 33%, I mean, you've got a solid business. And that means the owner's getting paid, but you've got profits in the business as well. And that's a good place to be.
And so let's say someone's got location 1 and they're doing a lot of revenue, but they're at 5% profit. Do you think it's worth them even exploring location 2 until they focus on number 1 to get it more profitable?
Well, first of all, it depends if they're paying themselves. If they're, let's say somebody wants to pay themselves $5,000 a month, all right, and that's your owner comp, and then they're profiting 3%. That's not so bad, But if they're not paying themselves what they want and then only profiting 3%, you probably need to optimize things a bit before taking the next step.
Do you go in with a range of how much you're willing to invest into a new gym? Is there like a broad range that you have in your head? You're like, or you have planned out, right, I can spend between this and this, and that's my kind of buy-in point there.
I'll once I do the figures, I'll know what I'd be comfortable spending, but it's very much what's financeable, and I use a debt cover ratio of 1.5. It basically means that you need to be able to fulfill a debt comfortably.
Yeah. And in terms of, so you've got location number 3 being purchased, and then long term, have you got a plan to go even further with this, or is there a number you're happy with? Or
so we got I'm in discussions with a few companies at the moment now. So the goal for this year is to add 2 locations to the group. Like I said, we took a year off to optimize everything. So this year I've got some focus. I'm looking at adding at least 2 this year.
And then will you take some time to focus on those 2 as well and then go, or?
I've taken that time. I've already taken that time the last year. Like we're in a good position now where we can start adding and growing quickly now with gyms. So 2 this year would be great. And then ideally, the goal really is I want to kind of get to 10 to 12. And I love the mentorship role. I love mentoring the staff, like the managers and things. So like my vision is to get 10, 12 gyms and have the managers, all come into our own little events where we can do our own workshops and work on, this is the strategy for the next kind of 2-3 years. These are the marketing campaigns that we're going to run and address them across the whole group.
Because you've now got the system for the 2, so now you can just replicate it over and over with these new ones that you buy, with these new businesses that you buy, basically.
Exactly. Yeah. New business comes in. We put our systems in on day one now. It's going to be. I've got the people in place. I've got the systems in place, and it's just a case of integrating it. And
you mentioned mentoring that you love doing. Obviously, you mentor the staff, but also other gym owners now at the moment. And I think this is kind of where I'd probably like to potentially wrap up on. But just through your experience of mentoring gym owners, what are the behavior traits of those that are most successful versus those that may struggle a little bit more?
Focus. I would say if you focus in, a lot of people, especially with business owners, they're wearing multiple hats and things. And it's really hard to keep your focus on one area. I think from the most successful business owners, they have the ability to I can't say this word, compartmentalize. Is that the word? Yeah. So the ability to compartmentalize, so they can focus on one thing and then move on to the next thing. But fundamentally, it's that, and it's about knowing your numbers and understanding the financial metrics. And fundamentally, business is based on numbers. And if you can't make it work on paper, you can't make the business work.
I think most gym owners, when they start off, aren't very good at those things that you've just listed off there initially, because they come from a fitness background, but the reality is those are the skills they need to hone in on to truly be successful. And
that's why everyone needs a mentor. You get into the fitness industry, you do a qualification, you get experience doing the job, right? But then you don't get experience being a business owner, right? And that's why the likes of FMA or FBDA, we can provide a solid foundation where you can learn the business skills that are necessary to actually understand what should be happening in terms of the numbers, but in terms of operationally, and in terms of setting the next steps for your business and your growth.
Amazing. And so obviously you are a mentor for the Fitness Business Development Academy. So they're our partners, and they work with a number of our FMA clients, including yourself, to be able to help them just get things in place. then where can people find you in terms of if they want to reach out and maybe they want to sell their gym to you or anything? Where can people find you?
Yeah, so I've got a website called bfitgroup.co.uk. You can find me on there, and it has a little bit of history about my background and kind of what I'm interested in. You could find me on socials, on like Instagram and LinkedIn and Facebook, but I'll be honest, most of my social stuff is more for family stuff. But if you want to see what's going on with the family, by all means, hook me up on there as well.
Amazing. Well, it's been a super interesting podcast to dive into all things acquisition. So thank you so much for coming down and for your time. And thanks for being on the show.
No worries. Excellent. Nice to be here.